So you guys all know why you're here. Maybe it's to protect yourselves from the rain. Hopefully it's actually to learn some tips and tricks from the media and how to pitch. So just first off, show of hands. How many people here have ever tried to get media attention in any way, shape, or form? Okay, great. How many people have succeeded in getting media attention? Okay, not bad, not bad. I see a lot of like this kind of movement. I feel like that's like maybe successful. So that's exactly what we're going to try and demystify here today. So our panelists have already been introduced. We're very, very lucky to have them from really important publications, the types of publications that you would be pitching to. And I come from a publication that isn't specialty. So I come from a local publication. So the way you pitch to me is different. So what we're going to explore are questions like how to actually prepare a pitch. What's the best way to reach people in the media, in the industry, to get your story heard? How do you follow up? What are these types of things? So we're going to be taking all the questions, and literally if you have personal experiences that you would like to share or questions that you have about how to go about doing it, feel free, raise your hand. I'll come into the audience and I'll just have you guys speak directly to our panelists. Just in case you want to remember again, Jason, Fitz, and Anne. Jason is from Entrepreneur Magazine, Fitz is from TechCrunch, and Anne is from Fortune. So I will start off. I know everyone's a little shy. It's okay. We'll start off by warming up the topic and ask our panelists a couple of questions that we always get. Being at CBC Montreal, one thing that we do here at Startupfest is we do a pitch competition. Some of you may have come and checked it out, where people pitch to us for a minute. So we already get to see a little bit what the questions and what the hesitations are by different people in the startup industry. So I'll start by asking Jason one question. What do you think is one of the most common mistakes people make when trying to pitch their startup to you?
They don't know what I'm looking for. Every publication is looking for something different, and I really strongly suggest that if you're going to reach out to anybody to pitch your business, you spend some time understanding the publication that you're reaching out to and the kinds of stories that they run. Because all three of us run different kinds of stories, and we might cover the same company, but we're going to cover it 3 different ways. And the better you can understand the thing that we're looking for, and it's not that hard, just spend some time critically reading and thinking about why was this story told in this way, what was the reporter trying to communicate to this audience. You'll have a better sense of the thing that you should tell me about your business. I'll give you an example for me, and then Fitz and Ann can speak to this, but I am often not looking for what does the company do. So when people send me a pitch and it's just like, my company does this cool thing, are you interested in it? The answer is no. Now, I might be interested in your story, but I'm not interested in the thing you do, because I'm a magazine about entrepreneurism, which means that the stories that I tell are really the stories about how entrepreneurs succeeded. I'm really interested in that process story. So, for example, when somebody once pitched me about a butter dish that they made, which is not usually something that I put into the magazine. We're not Butter Dish Monthly, but she had mentioned in her pitch, it was a very casual, cool email that I just happened to read, that she wanted to do some consumer testing on her butter dish. Pricing, size, color. And she approached a company, and they quoted her $10,000, and that was way too much money for her. And she had an idea, and that idea was that she could spend $98 on a one-way ticket from LAX, she lived in LA, to Vegas, which just gets her through security, then don't get on the plane, and instead spend hours and hours inside of an airport with a constantly refreshing group of people who have absolutely nothing better to do than answer questions about your butter dish. And that is how she did her market research. Brilliant! That is a great story for us. Now, if she had just pitched me an amazing butter dish, I wouldn't have run about it. But because she pitched me her process and it was so clever, that was a story for me.
Fitz, you can either answer that. Do you have a common mistake that people usually, do when they're trying to pitch to you?
So instead of talking about pitching to me, I'll talk about like pitch competitions, like you said, because those are so important. And one of the biggest problems I see in like the 1-minute pitches or 30-second pitches, which is really short, 1 minute's probably better, that we do at TechCrunch is it'll take people 45 seconds to talk about what their company does. They'll start with their name and what they did and what they're hoping to accomplish. And you could really just take the first sentence to say, my company is doing this. or we are X for X, whatever. And if you don't really say what you do in the first 20 seconds, people kind of zone out. So that's my biggest advice for someone pitching.
Anne?
Yeah, I could just answer it really briefly. For me, we don't cover a lot of startups specifically that often. We often look for bigger trends. So we end up writing a lot about startups, but not about the companies in particular. So if somebody can hook their message and their story to something larger, like for example, we talked about a satellite company recently that was looking at the parking lots of big box stores, and that was a new metric that they were using to judge performance. And it was a leading indicator to revenue. So that is a story that's interesting to us for bigger reasons, and the startup just happened to be a really good way into it.
If I can just piggyback on that thing that Ann just said, think about it this way. Sometimes you're not the story, but you can be part of the story. So if you reach out and you say, hey, here's this really interesting thing happening that I think you should know about. It's broad. It's really fascinating. I happen to have a lot of insight into it because my company does this and this. I think that would be really interesting. That's a great way to get in, because not every company is going to get that big feature. But if you just want to get in and get some attention, pitching the broader thing that you're a part of is a really good way to do that.
Does anyone have any questions yet leading up to what anyone has said, either on the panel or relating to a personal question, maybe in terms of something you tried to pitch and it didn't work and you're curious as to maybe why that didn't work or why you never heard back from your journalist? Any questions so far? I'll just take a...
Yeah.
I mean, it's not about us at the end of the day, right? It's about these guys, I guess. All right.
Hiya, guys.
Hi.
One thing I'm always kind of wondering and have issues with is whether you guys prefer on your side the exclusive or an embargo with a bunch of different outlets. From your side, how does that, when someone comes to you and says, will you do the exclusive or we're going to do an embargo with a bunch of different people, do you care, or is it something that you think about?
So TechCrunch does a lot of funding stories, which are normally all embargoed or exclusive. Doesn't necessarily make a difference. I mean, you have to kind of gauge that with different writers. Some writers at TechCrunch are really into exclusives. I don't mind as much. So you can't really go wrong with either of those, but the one wrong way to do it is give an embargo and tell someone else they can break it or go 30 minutes early. And then that pisses off everyone else, and a lot of the times the other magazines, not me, but some reporters are they get upset about that and won't run your story if you kind of go against your word to them. So that's something to watch out for.
I would just say that I think both work really well, but exclusive for us does a lot better traffic. More people read it. People get excited about it. So just from an audience perspective, exclusive tends to do well.
And I would say, from a local perspective, exclusives, sure, we care, but often we care more, and this is a point that all panelists touched upon, is the story. So even if it's not an exclusive, we'll still want to tell the story. In fact, in a local market, the competition is very, you have 3 different local TV stations or radio stations or whatever, and everybody ends up telling the same stories eventually. So yeah, sure, if you're the first one to tell it, great, but not being the first will not make us not want to tell the story, especially if there's an angle that really is important to us. So in a local context, it's the effect on the community, the local community. If you're someone who is really passionate about your city, then that's an important story for us to tell. So the exclusivity, it might be a big thing for some publications and might not be for others. So to Jason's point, really knowing your audience when you're pitching is really key, and knowing who will it matter that you're sending an exclusive to versus who won't it matter for. Let's say that. Any other questions? One thing that I see a lot of in the pitch tent, and maybe you guys can speak to this a bit, is people will tell their story. People will tell the story of their company, like you said, in 45 seconds, and then that last 15 seconds will be, oh, and it's great because of this, or we are unique because of this. And then in our 1-minute pitch afterwards, we get into, well, why did you start this company? Where did the idea come from? And that's where the interesting thing is. But often people don't want to put the why into the pitch. Why do you guys think the why is so important?
I mean, for me, it's important because it's the personal element of it. I mean, again, it depends on who you're pitching. But for me, and if you're reaching out to another publication where you know that your personal story will help get you coverage, you lead with that, or be really explicit about that and tell that story. Because the way that journalists think is there is, of course, just the information, but there's also the characters. And if you are a good character, if you are sympathetic or interesting or just engaging, that honestly does make a difference. It will make a difference, but in terms of the size of the story that we run for you. I mean, there have been so many times where a story started out as a 500-word thing, but because the person was so fascinating, it blew up into a feature. Right? That was because that person was willing to be open and honest and a little vulnerable and share the whys and the hows about themselves. So I really encourage you to be willing to put yourself forward as much as your startup.
I have a good story where I get, like these people do, probably hundreds of email pitches a day. One started, it was from a PR person, but they said, the CEO, founder of this company is a lawyer, rabbi, startup founder from Philadelphia. And I'm from Philadelphia and Jewish and in law school.
So that is
literally
right up his alley, right?
And I think what I said to myself is like, I have to know this person. Philadelphia is pretty small. I didn't know this person, but I mean, that was kind of an instant connection. And I don't know if the PR person kind of did their research on me or not, because that story is interesting to anyone, even if I wasn't as similar to him. So if you are a person that is that interesting or can make yourself sound that interesting, definitely don't be shy about it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. When we're evaluating people to cover on lists, 40 under 40, that kind of thing, we look at their cultural reach, we look at their economic impact, and we also really want to know what their story is. If they're 19 and they have a $1 billion company, it's even more impressive than if they're 50 and they have a $1 billion company. Have they done it before? And also as to the why question, I do think it's good for a reader if you can get that into the headline. It's almost a more interesting story inherently, because if you have a company and the headline is "You're never going to have to charge your phone again because this battery is that amazing," that's just a better story inherently.
All right, guys. Question over here. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Brian. My question is around trying to get on the radar of those in the media, and you're talking to it in part now. I'm trying to get an understanding from your perspective. You get bombarded with emails every day. You get bombarded with phone calls. What's the filtering mechanism that you're using? And I'm looking at this as sort of the broader perspective. We have a product that could be used by those that cover the financial sector in the media. And I've spent some time trying to get on their radars, and I only had one out of about 100 that actually replied to me from continuously calling and emailing and so forth. And I'm giving the product to them for free because I think that it's a good fit for them. I missed the boat on that, obviously. So what's the filtering mechanism that you in the media would use to say that this is worth looking at if you've got 100 of them every day that you're scanning through?
Yeah, I can speak to that really quickly. I often don't respond to pitches, but I would say, and I don't know if you guys agree with this, I do kind of respond to gimmicks a little bit. So there was this sewing company that was pitching, and the way they pitched me was, hey, we make capes, among other things, but they made these capes for kids' parties, but they also made them for boardrooms. And so they sent these pictures of CEOs of major companies wearing capes. And that was great. Normally I wouldn't cover that sewing company, but just that fun thing that they did made the difference. And there are other things too. I like gimmicky food mashups, like I ate the Whopperito. When PayPal paid people to sign up, it was a stunt that worked for me.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Were you pitching because you wanted coverage, or you have a service that you were trying to sell media organizations?
It was more, I see the media as a way to expose our product.
Oh, okay.
And
so you were looking for coverage for your company?
Yeah, and the approach that I took was, I was told categorically by some in the media business that I'm not going to pay you for this, but if I happen to use it, I'll let others know that I used your product. And that was a great fit for me.
Service.
What's that? It's
So it's a service that media companies use.
yeah.
Got it.
So, because I just want to, I'll just say this, and then we can keep. If you have a service that you're trying to sell media companies, reaching out to a journalist is a terrible way to do it, because the journalists are all completely disconnected from the business side of the operation, like intentionally so. Basically, except for the editor-in-chief, everybody else doesn't know anyone on the business side or doesn't engage with them. So if you had like a service that you wanted the company to use, going through the journalist, they're not going to know what to do with it, so they're going to delete it. Yeah.
So we have fundamental valuation software. That's what we do. We value companies that are trading on the public markets. And I've been targeting financial reporters and offering them to use our software to run valuations on the companies that they're following, discussing, talking about, doing stories on. And oh, by the way, we ran the numbers on StockCalc, which is our product. And we're coming up with, we see a valuation there of Johnson & Johnson's at $140, and we're getting a valuation of $145, and here are the details. Gives them some more value add for the story that they're producing, some more content that they can put in, and then their readers would want to take a look back at our product.
So I would just say, and I mean, my perspective is a little different coming from local media, but that would always have to go through someone higher than the actual financial reporter to start using using software, using a program, or using some kind of system, because of the barrier to entry. Even though you may explain that it's very easy to use and it'll give you a lot more value for what you're trying to accomplish as a financial reporter, there still is a barrier because the journalist, as Jason mentioned, is so bogged down, or as they mentioned, so bogged down in the day-to-day. So in that particular case, you may want to try to find someone who's more in the decision-making world, who's more of an operations person, and that could help you get what you need a little faster.
I think my problem would be that I don't know if I would trust the service, right? So I don't know if I want to now base my reporting off of this startup's research, even though it may be excellent work, right? I think that I would know what to do with it because I wouldn't know how to trust it. So you'd have to get around that, which I think means doing something outside of media first and then coming in.
I think to summarize, your service is much more likely to be used by reporters if it's an email from an editor-in-chief to their 30 writers saying, hey guys, I like this service, play around with it, see if you like it, as opposed to you emailing them directly and it probably gets lost.
The other thing I would say is that some companies who have done really well getting their data out there are like Pornhub and OkCupid. And they create the story themselves, they use their own data, and then they shop the story. That might be another way to do it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I have 3 questions. One is, what is the most interesting way you guys picked up a story, aside from the traditional email, like a cool story? And the second question is, I wonder if there's a dinosaur that wants to ask a question. And then the other question is, how do you get from law to interviewing? Like, I'm in law school as well, and I find that really cool, but that's the other question.
So the first question was, what was the most creative or unique or interesting way that you picked up on a story?
Yeah, so my favorite way to find a story is like to find a service I like and just come across it and use it. And if I like it, my thought is normally like, wow, I want to write about this. Like, I hope TechCrunch hasn't written about it yet, and then I'll type it in and see if we have or not.
So personal experience in that particular case, right? Like just you finding something, you using it, and
that's
then
the
you
best.
feeling it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just talking like what's our personal preferences, it's funny because here we are. Basically, we're going to be talking about you guys pitching us functionally, right? But the thing we actually like to do the most is find stuff on our own, which means that when you pitch us, you need to be so compelling that we can't turn it down, because our instinct is always going to be to ignore and to find our own stuff. So that's the literal barrier that anybody who's pitching has to bust through, because every story that I've written that I feel extremely proud of started by me stumbling upon something on my own and asking a lot of questions until I found the story. But there have been a million stories that I've run that were great and great for my readers that were pitched to me, but they had to bust through that wall.
Yeah, I think that. Same thing. Those were good answers.
I think what Jason also mentioned means making yourself findable is really important. So making yourself searchable. I know, and I'm sure it's the same experience with you guys. When I stumble across something, or if someone even pitches something to me, if I Google them, or if I look at how they're active online and what they've been doing, and I don't find anything, or I find questionable, weird websites. Exactly. Then it's like, oh, well, are they actually at a stage where they're ready to be talked about? Are they actually at a stage where they're ready? So being findable does give a signal, and a little bit of an indication of if you're actually ready to be pitched to the media or not. Next question?
Hey, guys. We almost touched on the question before, but I think it wasn't really answered for my part. How do you guys like being approached? Because there's so many different mediums, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or even just straight up emails, and then there's the general box emails. What works for you for us to get in front of you?
They told me they love being called on their cell phones at around 6:30 p.m.
And we're putting their numbers on the screen.
Showing up at my door also really works. Just pound hard. Yeah.
I mean, email is the most non-intrusive method, and of course there's a downside that things get lost in email, but the fact that it's non-intrusive almost makes up for it. I mean, phone calls are the worst. Yeah. Twitter DMs are, I mean, fine, kind of the same as email. No?
No. Yeah. You'll find, I mean, the frustrating part about answering this is that every editor is going to have a somewhat different answer, with the exception of email is everybody's preference and phone is everyone's least preference, unless you also added in showing up at the door, which would be underneath the phone. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I hate being pitched through social media. I don't like Twitter DMs or Facebook. LinkedIn, it's like okay because it's a professional forum, so I'm less critical of that. But here's the important thing I think in email, at least for me, and these guys can say if they agree with me or not. I like really casual emails, like really personal, casual emails. Don't send me a press release. Don't send me something formal. Don't send me something that felt like it came out of a business school. Like send me look at me. I'm just like a dude with a V-neck T-shirt and shorts here, right? Like think about that. Like just pitch that, because I'm just a guy sitting at a computer reading emails, and that's how I like to be connected to. So when people send me things that feel way too formal, I often feel like they were mass blasted, and I just delete.
I'd also say, and again, as they mentioned, it is so specific to the publication. For me, I am the social media editor and host at CBC Montreal. So if you pitch to me on Facebook, not on my personal Facebook, although that has happened and I have accepted it, it is fine. If you message CBC Montreal on Facebook, and I'm sure this will be the case with a lot of local media outlets, where there is actually someone on the other end of that page, and it's not going in a long list. People have not started pitching on Facebook as much as people pitch on email, because that whole messenger service hasn't really been around as long as email has, obviously. So I would say a lot of the local journalists in the CBC shop here in Montreal will look at the Facebook messaging and be like, oh, there was this really cool thing that came up on Facebook. Obviously, probably not the same case for more network-wide publications, but for a local publication, that may be a way you'd want to go.
I would just say email is absolutely the best. I actually don't mind being called.
Oh, wow.
If someone sends an email and then calls and says, hey, I just sent you an email. Yeah.
Real trooper.
I don't look at LinkedIn, I don't look at Twitter DMs. But I also agree with the casual email thing. One thing that really works for me is sometimes a founder will forward a press release, so it has all the data, but it also has the personal touch. I find that is an easy way to do it. And I would also say for desk side meetings, which we get a lot of pitches for and are also really good, come alone. Come with, sometimes if you come alone without a PR person, you can have a more authentic connection with the reporter you're talking to. We have people come in with huge entourages, which is always kind of a barrier.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I think just to summarize, no matter how you talk to us in person today or whatever it is, we all work out of our inboxes. Like that's, at least for me, that's the to-do list at the end of the day. So if we meet in person, on Twitter, on a plane, I'm going to say email me because that's where I work out of.
Perfect. Great.
Hey guys, my question's from the other side of the story. I'm the editor at McGill's Entrepreneurship magazine. One day I would like to be sitting where you are right now. And I'm curious about I'm curious whether or not you guys can share a little bit about what the path looked like for you to get to where you are right now, and share one timeless principle that business journalists should work on.
Sure. There is no one path. That's what you'll learn after we've all spoken. There's no one path, and you shouldn't be concerned about finding a specific path, because if you say no to opportunities that could have taught you really wonderful things, you're limiting your growth. I worked at community newspapers, Boston Magazine, Men's Health, Fast Company, Maxim, and now an entrepreneur, and I've freelanced for everybody, you know, mostly not in business. And I'd never, running entrepreneur was not my goal. I mean, I love it, I'm really happy I do it, but it's like, I never wrote it down as like a goal, right? You see where your career goes and you discover what you're great at, and then you pursue that. So I would say that for me, the timeless takeaway is skill sets. Like every job that you take, just think about what you can learn from that job. What skills can you take away from that job that are transferable elsewhere? You will find as you get deeper into journalism that there's lots of different kinds of things to master. There's packaging, which is a kind of editing. There's long form editing. You know, there's being a really good line editor. You need to learn all those things, and you can learn them in steps along the way. And so take whatever job can offer you an opportunity to learn, and then you will build yourself and go wherever you want to go.
I had like the total opposite approach. I had actually never written anything published ever before I started working at TechCrunch. I was a business school student at USC that read TechCrunch obsessively every day, you know, since I was like 12 years old. And one summer as an internship 3 years ago, I thought it would be a great opportunity to learn about startups and get to do awesome things like this every day and talk to great entrepreneurs. So I kind of reached out, and I didn't just apply, like submit an application online. I don't think that ever works. It's kind of like the personal touch, and you know, track down a reporter there or an editor there and kind of show them how much you care about it. And don't leave it to chance. Don't say, here's the application, and wait 3 weeks. I mean, follow up in a respectful way, send them samples, do whatever you can do, I guess, but don't submit an application and forget about it. I'm sure you hire an entrepreneur. I mean, maybe that's similar.
Yeah, no, well, you know what I do is, honestly, is I hire people I've worked with, and for that reason, another piece of advice: freelance your ass off. I quit 2 jobs and I freelanced. I freelanced while having every job. This is the first job where I'm not like actively always writing for other magazines as well, because that way you're building relationships with other editors and you're proving to them that you can do the work, and therefore when they have an opening, they'll be thinking about you.
I completely agree with what they said about flexibility. I think that you can have a goal in mind, but by the time you're young, by the time that you graduate and you have some experience, that publication might not be there. That whole medium might not be there. So you see a lot of interesting companies, blogs, you know, things that we probably don't even know about yet, podcasts. You know, branch out is a really good idea. And then I would also say a lot of journalists, myself included, know a lot about writing and know a lot about journalism, but they don't know necessarily a lot about the subjects they're covering. So some of my favorite people to read are actually experts in finance or experts in law, and they also write. So I would say almost before you concentrate on becoming an amazing writer, learn your subject area really well, and you'll be a better journalist for it.
Also, take advantage of being a student. Like, it's so much easier to get an emailed response or a meeting or whatever it is when you're a student. So use it while you can.
I would also take that one step further and say I am an obsessive, like Wikipedia and every other possible online article that you could read, like, person. So I will spend hours at night just reading things and learning more about things, not just about tech or the beats that I'm covering, but everything. Because really, when you're in this world, the more you know, the more confident you are. So even if you know something, you learn about something that is not your beat, it gives you so much more, I guess, ability to dive into other subjects, and it gives you that flexibility, and it gives you that kind of like more multitaskability. So I would say learn just to echo what they're all saying, learn what you don't know, learn more of what you do know, and read as much as you can. Wikipedia, it's obviously not always the most credible thing. I just like it because there's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down, and you can start reading a bunch of different things. But yeah, just learn, always learn. Any other questions? I have a question, actually. How many people here are part of startups that are business to business? So this is something that I find really interesting, and maybe you guys can address this. In our pitch competition, the same thing, a lot of B2B pitches. What I find often ends up happening is it's very hard for a general interest audience or the mass audience, especially when it comes to like a local audience if you're trying to get coverage, to understand what the worth is for me to write an article about a business-to-business idea when it's so jargony and it's so insider baseball, and how do you actually find the story that will appeal to the end user, not of your product, but the end user audience side. Maybe you guys can speak a little bit about the B2B and pitching when you're in that world rather when you're a business-to-consumer company. It's
a great question. I can take it.
I think I would have a B2B PR company if I knew the answer to that question.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's hard. I'm sure you all know it's really hard because it's so much easier to tell a story to a consumer audience about a consumer-facing company. The solution that I have honestly goes back to something that I said before, which is to really understand what the thing is that every publication is telling its readers. I was trying to think, like, what's the last B2B company that I wrote about or that we ran a story on, and this is not exactly a B2B company, but it is doing a lot of B2B, which is Ship. Which is mostly shifted into serving businesses now, right? This is this app where you just like call them, they show up, and they like package your stuff and take it off, so you don't have to go to the post office. And the reason that we wrote about them was because they were really open about this very interesting strategy about how they built towards their eventual customer base, which they always knew was going to be businesses. They wanted to serve small businesses, but they weren't going to be able to scale up fast enough to do that from the start. So they started by serving consumers, even though they ultimately didn't want to build a consumer business. And the way that they did that and thought through it, I thought was a really insightful way to share with readers the way to build a company in steps. And so by taking us through the kind of entrepreneurial journey of this B2B company, I thought I had something that I was able to offer my readers. So translating what you do into what the company is, or what the media outlet is looking for.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you look at the overlaps between like a B2B and B2C company, sure, the audience is not the same, but they both have founders that may have interesting stories. They both have fundraising to write about, and those are the things that are overlapping and the things I think you would put forward.
What's really interesting about Ship, that's a really good idea if you're B2B, B2C. But I would also say, in terms of not making the hard sell on the startup, but being a resource, being an expert, I want to know about the pain point of Boeing that they need this specific thing. We cover large companies, and if this thing really matters to a large company, it matters to us. So your startup might not be the story, but the bigger issue might be the story, and you're the poster child for it.
Yeah, of course, if you can get a giant client for your B2B startup, that's always great, a public company or something like that.
If you have like a success story, maybe that you can actually tell your story through the story of this other company. I find that sometimes people are reluctant to do that because then, it's not about me anymore, it's about the other company that had a journey. But in fact, you're able to tell your story through the other story, and that's actually a more compelling story. So, yeah, exactly. So that's where, where you might want to think a bit more creatively about how to present that pitch.
And for that matter, that also could serve a lot of needs. Because when you reach out to the media, you shouldn't be doing it because you feel like you should or because it's an ego boost. You should have a really specific reason that you're reaching out to the media. You should step back and say, what is my goal? And then what publication can help me achieve that goal? So your goal could be looking good to investors because you're going to go out and raise money. Your goal could be that you want to find new customers. You want to find new enterprise customers. And so the way that you tell a story and in the right medium could really help you achieve those goals. So you should approach it strategically. And for a B2B company to tell the story of how they worked with Boeing, if their goal is to present themselves to other enterprise customers, that could be an excellent way to do that.
We could probably take one more question if anyone wants. Otherwise, we can wrap up. It's totally up to you guys. One more question? I think there's something in the back over there. That's okay. We can test it out and
Wild
see.
card.
I don't know if Fitz dodged this question earlier about his law school, but I would love to
he
hear
did.
that story.
You can go ahead.
No, I just
Your
think,
journey.
I think it's a little boring. The reason I'm in law school is I'm not a journalist by trade, and I will probably move back to the business side of things eventually. But that being said, having a law degree I think is super useful in reporting. Number one, because it lets me really understand what's happening in legal-focused stories. Like, for example, DraftKings and FanDuel are the two big daily fantasy sports companies that have major legal issues in the US, and I'm able to cover that, I think, with a more focused eye and a more educated eye than some other reporters. And I mean, Google and Uber in a lawsuit now over self-driving technology, there are always great stories like that. And with a law degree, it's going to be so much easier to get a job writing about those.
This actually is a really great lesson. Most of the time when you reach out to a reporter, they are not an expert in what you do at all. They may barely understand it. So you should approach with that mindset of being really, really clear, think through, especially a B2B company, like be really clear about what you do in a way that an average consumer could understand, because he is really the rare reporter who has a legal background who's writing about legal things. Most of them do, I mean, you know, the New York Times legal reporters have legal background, but most don't. Most don't.
So one thing I'll say, maybe to wrap up, summarize a little bit of what we've been talking about. So if we had to, and I like to do this, you guys can correct me if you think I'm wrong, I like to sum up your pitching into 3 whys. So why me, why you, why now? So why me, if I'm the startup, I'm speaking for the startup, why me? What is my story? What is my compelling advantage? What is so great about me as a startup founder that my story has to be told? Why you, as in why your publication? Why TechCrunch? Why Entrepreneur? Why Fortune? What is it about their audience that would be interested in what I'm doing, right? And then the why now, and Anne spoke to this as well. What is the trend? What is happening right now that I can hook my startup into? What is going on that gives it legs and makes it timely, right? Do you guys have any other whys or any other like little things that they can take away for when they're pitching? What else? What have you missed? You probably missed something.
I would just say develop personal relationships. Even if you don't have news to be covered right now, there's no reason reaching out and saying, hey, I like the story you wrote, or hey, I'm doing this, just wanted to say hi. And it seems a little fake, but it's really not, because not enough people do it, especially if you're being genuine.
One thing I would say is that I love the media, but I would say don't hesitate to get your own story out there. Like, we do contributed pieces. We've seen them get a lot of buzz. We host them on our site. You can host them on your site. You don't necessarily need to get a reporter's attention to get your story told. The other thing I would say is, you know, we keep coming back to this, but really be an expert. Be really good at what you're doing. One of my favorite financial journalists used to work at Goldman Sachs. So whether you're a journalist or whether you're a reporter, just knowing the industry and having something to say that people want to hear is really the whole point.
Jason, last words? You're ending it. The pressure's on.
I wish the dinosaur had asked a question. My last words are that I'm just going to second Fitz's on the building relationships. I have a lot of people who have just started email relationships with me, and I chat with them, and sometimes they don't make it into the magazine, or sometimes they make it in the magazine years later. Like, you cannot expect instant results when you're reaching out to media, because you're ultimately on the media's timetable. And so the best thing that you can do is be useful and be available, and if you play the cards right, something good will come.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. All of our Twitter handles are up here, and I'm sure you guys can be resourceful and figure out how to email us, since that is the preferred method of communication. So feel free to reach out.
Oh yeah, Park Slope, Brooklyn, between 4th and 5th Ave. Just come, like 6:30 is great.
But
Just
come
pound.
with pizza if you are going.
Yeah.
All right, thanks guys. Thank you so much. If you have any other questions, I am definitely around at the CBC Media Pitch Tent, and I'm sure these guys might be floating around, but if
we'll
not,
be around.
Be sure to contact them through all the channels that you guys can find them on. Thank you
everyone.
so much.